President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Madam President, our country has had some pretty severe economic challenges of late. I'm not talking about the recent stock market losses, although those are quite important for someone with a 401k. I'm talking about how real Americans, average Americans, feel as if the American dream of home ownership, of buying a new car or truck, buying their child a car, affording a student loan, is just slipping out of their grasp. We saw this fear during the Biden administration when inflation was so high, the Federal Reserve increased interest rates, and as these interest rates rose, so did consumer interest rates on all sorts of things, directly impacting the ability of a family to realize the American dream. This speech is about how do we preserve that ability of Americans to achieve that dream, and how what we are doing today, tonight, in this Congress directly impacts that. Now, it may seem pretty distant to someone watching from home, but it does directly impact that. How much money the federal government borrows, how much this budget resolution leads to increased indebtedness, that sounds abstract, but it impacts your ability to buy that home, to buy that car, to attend that school. And some of the process discussions that normally wouldn't work, how does Congress do this, how does it do that, if you're not in Congress, they're actually extremely important to this discussion of how much we are going to borrow and how much we are going to enable Americans in Louisiana, the state I'm privileged to represent, and elsewhere, achieve their dream. Let me explain. As our country borrows more money, so we pass something and our debt explodes, and as our country has to borrow money to pay for that debt, it begins to compete with businesses, with individuals, with families, as they also go out and try and borrow money. Now, the federal government's always going to get the first amount, and it is going to be the others who have to pay more to compete. And paying more means you pay more for your mortgage, you pay more for your car note, you pay more for your student loan interest rate. The only way to keep this from happening is for the federal government to live within its means. I think the inflation of the last 4 years is one of the principal reasons the American people tossed Joe Biden out and they put Donald Trump back into the White House. The Biden administration did not live within its means, borrowed a lot of money, drove up interest rates. The American people couldn't afford that which they expected to be able to buy. They voted for change. Now, President Trump understands this. When he spoke to Congress last month, spoke of renewal of the American dream. And in that speech about renewing the American dream, he spoke about having a balanced budget. He understands, he desires, he sees the connection between living within our means and making it good for fellow Americans. And by the way, I agree with him. I agree that balancing the federal budget is key to preserving that dream. So why is this important now? Our country, right now, not tomorrow, right now, is $36 trillion in debt, $36 trillion with a T. And if we do nothing, if all we do is status quo, continue on the path we're on, it is estimated we will add $21 trillion to that indebtedness over the next 10 years. Now, what about today? We're going to vote on a budget resolution tonight. If we vote on that budget resolution and it leads to a reconciliation bill which is not paid for, we will add another $5 to $11 trillion. On top of that, 36 trillion plus 21 trillion, we could end up with 65 to almost $70 trillion of indebtedness 10 years from now if we don't do that right. I'm a doctor. I'm going to borrow a term from medicine. I'm going to adapt it, if you will. That would be congressional malpractice. We do not want to be guilty of congressional malpractice. Now, at some point, the problem begins to build upon itself. Currently, a fifth of tax revenue is used to pay interest on the debt. 20% of all the money the federal government gets is right now being used to pay interest on the debt. That is more than we spend on national defense. I'm going to repeat that one. Right now, we're paying more, paying back people who lent us money than we're paying to protect our country and to pay the troops who are doing so. There's a historian, Niall Ferguson, who says that when a country is spending more on debt service than on defending itself, that is the mark of a country in decline. Current Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made a similar point in a Fox News op-ed. He wrote that, quote, America's next security crisis is lurking in our pocketbooks, that our escalating debt crisis hurts national security in three key ways. It diminishes our financial surge capacity. It robs our private sector of capital for productive investment, and it imperils America's preeminent role in international financial markets. Well, Scott Bessent is now Secretary Bessent, and he is right. The debt is a threat to our national security and to the economic security of the American family. By the way, families know this. You might be in Caddo Parish, Louisiana, you might be in Covington, Louisiana, but they've learned to live within their means, and we should learn something from those Louisiana families. So let's discuss the budget resolution before us. Now, to be sure, this resolution only sets up a discussion of a reconciliation bill. And the reconciliation bill is where we actually establish how much is spent and where it should be spent. Nevertheless, this budget resolution points in a direction and establishes certain parameters. Now, at this point, I'm going to discuss a little bit about process. And there's been a lot of debate in Washington about using current policy versus current law as baseline in this budget resolution. Now, current policy has never been used as baseline involving this much money and in a reconciliation bill. And I'm going to show a chart here. In this chart, this is the years over here. This is 2025 going all the way out to 2055. And this is how much our debt is as a percent of our tax revenue. And you can see that if this is what the Congressional Budget Office says is our current trajectory, that in 2055 we'll have a debt to GDP ratio of about 156%, that under what we're looking at could increase that to 211 to 230%. So this is the trajectory you're on, which is not great. But if all we do is what we're doing today without any effort to offset it, we would increase this 210 to 230%. Now, somewhere around 174%, the economists say we're in trouble. To borrow a gastroenterological term, I'm a gastroenterologist, we're in deep doo-doo. And in that is what we have to worry about. Now, I've discussed this extensively with my Senate colleagues. I'm pleased to say there is a commitment from President Trump and the White House to work with senators to go through the budget line by line to see where there can be savings. The White House and Congress have committed to working together to decrease the regulatory hassle that keeps a business from starting a new venture, to create more jobs, to hire more people, to give them better salaries. Let's cut that red tape and allow those businesses and those workers to achieve their potential. And doing so increases revenue. When people are making more money, they pay more taxes. Clearly, the president's working hard now to make the government work more efficiently, again, which saves us money. I have been assured that there is a commitment in other ways to pay for the eventual reconciliation bill. Now, I am not saying that I think that it is better that we use current policy as baseline. It's never been done before in a setting like this. I think it establishes a dangerous precedent. It might be within the rules to do so, but it doesn't mean it's wise to do so. And as a conservative, I know sometimes that even if you can open Pandora's box, it's better not to. Put differently, just because you can doesn't mean you should. But it appears we're going to do that. Also, using current policy as baseline should not suggest to us that the current tax code is perfect. I would say far from it. According to publicly available information, Jeff Bezos, the second richest man in the world, got a child tax credit several years ago. Now, tax credits for children are supposed to go to middle-income and lower-income families, not to the second richest man in the world. I hope as we go through this, we can modify that. Let the dollars go where they're needed, not to someone who is obviously wealthier than any of us put together. All that said, this vote's not taking place in a vacuum. It's taking place when the stock market has had 2 successive days of greater than 1,500 points decline. This kind of crashing stock market creates uncertainty, which makes companies less likely to invest, which makes it less likely that new jobs will be created. And creating new, good-paying jobs is essential to that individual, that family, enjoying the American dream. Upon consideration, and given the commitment from leadership, I would say that not passing this budget resolution could increase the uncertainty in the economy, and that is something I do not wish to do. And given the commitment from leadership to pay for this bill by a variety of mechanisms, whether it is from within the reconciliation vehicle or outside of that process, and once more, the need to reestablish confidence among those creating jobs, I will vote for this budget resolution. And as we move on from this budget resolution to the reconciliation bill, I will look to make sure that we are truly paying for it and addressing the national debt. And to that end, let me kind of mention something as an aside. No, not as an aside, as directly impacting this conversation. I encourage the use of America's abundance as a way to increase the possibility of Americans achieving the American dream, and as a way to also help pay for the government we now have. One example, I applaud President Trump for advocating greater exploration of oil and gas on federal lands. This creates great paying jobs. It is a tax base for communities, and it generates significant revenue for the federal government. Not by raising taxes, and it doesn't cut benefits, but by exploiting, if you will, in a positive way, the resources we have to produce that which is essential to living a modern life. I have also proposed in other settings other solutions that can address our nation's indebtedness without raising taxes or cutting benefits. Again, I've spoken to these in the past. I will speak to them in the future. I want America to be great for all Americans, that we can all live to the limits of our God-given gifts. Creating opportunity is part of this. My hope, my expectation, is that through this process we are currently in, we will create more opportunity for every American to express his or her God-given gifts and to achieve the American dream. With that, I yield.